two feminist icons, Gloria Steinem and Sissy Farenthold. Today we're talking about Sissy Farenthold's history, her significance not only in the women's movement but in American history. When did you both meet Gloria?
We will probably have to figure that out together. I can tell you that I first heard about Sissy somewhere between 67 and 69 because I was working with the United Farm Workers and Cesar Chavez on trying to get publicity for their effort because they were under a lot of threat. And I heard that there was another crazy white woman in Texas.
Anglo, as we're called.
Yeah, well, I'm here, so I said, right. I think you were in the state legislature. Either you were doing legal work for them with legal
I'd been
aid or
involved
ACLU.
with their strike down in the valley when the Rangers were so outrageous when they were trying to organize the farm workers. I represented a woman who lost her job because of the strike. It's a long story, but come to think of it, and that was when I was doing work for the ACLU.
Mm-hmm.
So that's literally the first. So that would have been 67, and then the resolution support and so forth was in the legislature in 69. So there was that 67.
Yeah, I definitely heard about Sissy at that time. I think we might only have met during the Equal Rights Amendment effort, though.
I think the first thing I remember distinctly was this wonderful phone call I had from you during the campaign in 72. And I said, "Where are you?" And you said, "Dallas." And you said you supported me, but it was up to me whether it was better for you to be in or out of the state. And so, remember, this is 72. Things have changed even in Texas.
And what was your answer?
I just appreciated her support and laughed about it because she was on her way out, but she tendered it to me for sure.
And then we ended up in one of your two gubernatorial campaigns in your cousin's plane.
That's right.
Campaigning around this extremely
Well, I had
large
to rename
state.
it. It was the Maryland, and then we named it something else to be a little more, political, I guess you'd say. But we usually had just peanuts on board. So it was a stripped-down campaign in every way.
So you, Gloria, were Shirley Chisholm delegate.
No, because I had lost. You run on a slate of delegates pledged to the candidate, so I was not a delegate because our slate in New York State lost.
But then the question was, would she run as McGovern's vice presidential candidate?
Yes,
and
right.
Talk about that. She said no.
Well, there was what seemed like a long period of time, but probably was only a day, I think, in which I believe that Shirley was trying to decide whether to do that or not. And clearly, if she was going to do it, then she was going to be the candidate. But when she decided she didn't want to, that, she felt that having run for the president was her statement and she didn't want to then, run for vice president, then we had already asked Sissy if she would be willing to.
Yeah, and I
run.
don't know who made that phone call to me one morning and said, "Would you consider this because Shirley Chisholm is not running?" So that call came after that decision was made. And it coincided with these young students from Baylor having been up and down the East Coast proselytizing in my behalf, which I really wasn't particularly aware of. I thought, there's nothing to that. Because we were in a special session at the legislature at the time.
They brought thousands of placards that said Sissy for VP.
And I think it's the only campaign headquarters ever in Flamingo Park. It was tough. There was not
or in
even
the Betsy Ross Motel. That's where we.
And when the vice presidential thing came up in Texas, I lost my telephone. Pierre Salinger took it away in a huff and a puff.
What do you mean? Why?
Well, because I was head of the Texas McGovern delegation. And so the only contact we had with the McGovern headquarters was with the telephone. But he was so irritated that my name was going to go into nomination that he took my phone away.
I never knew that. See, I'm
You
learning.
didn't know that?
No.
I haven't forgotten it.
Right.
Sissy, how did you feel when you got the call? Do you want to have your name put into contention?
Well, I'll tell you what. Yeah, I said sure. You know, I'd been campaigning for 6 months or something. It was just another day. But I can well recall when the counting started, I stood at the rim of the auditorium and I thought, you know, you might not get one vote.
Turned out not to be true.
To
Right.
be true. But I had that. And it wasn't a total surprise because of these students, Amy, that had been talking about it and took material with them, and took about 3 months, I think, and went up. I wasn't paying much attention to them, but it didn't come as a shock.
Mm. And the most moving part, for me personally, of the whole convention, which was full of drama at every moment,
Every morning.
were the nominating speeches for Sissy. Because we had wanted to express the breadth of support for her. So there was someone from the Poor People's Caucus, from the Hispanic Caucus, from the Black Caucus, from
And
the
the
Women's
Vietnam business.
And right, I mean, I've forgotten
We
how
tried
many
to be, I mean,
nominators
it was what we were
there
thinking
were.
about.
But there was supposed to be one nominator, but of course we
went
divided
away.
the time, among a variety of people. And one was Fannie Lou Hamer, and I will not forget ever,
No, I won't
because
either.
I believe it was she wasn't well. It was maybe the
No.
last public event that she was able to participate in. But she wanted to nominate Sissy because she said, I know how hard it is for a Southern white woman to do what Sissy has done. And I hope that speech exists.
You also were the first person to put her name up. Can you talk about that moment? And
Well, I was the Trojan horse, I was supposed to be the only nominator, but then I gave some of my other time
made our own rules up.
So we made our own, right. So I got up to do it first. I was pretty scared, I have to say, because writers don't want to talk. That's why we're writers, so the idea of getting up in front of the convention, even though by that time it was the middle of the night,
It was,
because we had managed to make them flout all the rules of good coverage, for which we were never forgiven.
never forgiven.
Right. So I spoke first, and then the others spoke.
do you remember what you said?
I don't remember the words. I just remember the feeling.
Which
Because
one?
Sissy had already run for governor. She had done all of these brave things for farm workers, for the Equal Rights Amendment, for all kinds of important issues in Texas. We're close to the same age, but she was just enough ahead of me, so I felt she was ahead of me on the path. And I just so much wanted it to be serious and good and strong.
All of which, of course, it was.
Did you speak with George McGovern?
Well, by that time, I don't think so. I mean, I think that Gary Hart was his representative. I don't think I actually spoke with McGovern until the convention was over. Till
I don't think I ever saw McGovern.
Yeah, and Gary Hart was, I would say, quite angry at us.
Because?
The winner-take-all rule, which was necessary for McGovern to get the nomination, was threatened by our challenge to the North Carolina delegate selection process. And so though they had, in my view, they had promised us two things, both of which they went back on. One was that they would support us on the delegate selection challenge because they were the McGovern reform rules, after all. And they went back on that because it would threaten the winner-take-all rule they needed in California. So they negated their promise on that. And I remember, having this fervent discussion on the floor, and Walter Cronkite was saying from the booth up there, I don't know what they're doing down there. Next they'll be, wanting slots for left-handed Lithuanians or something. Yeah. He said something so dismissive. Because he didn't know what was going on, but besides that, he was dismissive.
Who helped campaign for Sissy for votes among the delegates?
Well, there wasn't a lot of time to do that.
No. Now, Bella worked hard in the New York delegation.
Yes,
because she took me over there. And the caucus women, because and I've told this story many times, that I carried both Arkansas and Oklahoma, because the chairman, Alberts, the speaker, and Gail Bumpers had both gone off to visit during the voting process, and the caucus women took it over. And in both, I couldn't believe, how did this happen? What's going on?
Yeah, and I think it was Brownie Ledbetter in Arkansas.
Brownie in Arkansas.
Right. So also the caucus, the National Women's Political Caucus, had been meeting every morning, so we had an arena in which to say, Sissy's running, lobby your candidate, your delegates.
Yeah. I would say generally it was the caucus.
Let's talk about the power of the National Women's Political Caucus and how important it was.
It was very important at that time, and I didn't come to it till that convention, because my first recollection of the caucus was reading about 4 lines in the local paper in the summer of '71, saying this has been organized, and thinking this is absolutely wonderful, because I was there as the only woman in the Texas legislature, and before the election to that office, I had called the Democratic National Committee and asked them if they could give me a list of other women legislators. I wanted to talk to someone, and they said, we don't have such information. So given that experience, that's how much it meant to me to realize that there was this organization that was going to be on this subject. And then in January of '72, I came to Washington and Francie Barnard took me over to the caucus office at that time. But I hadn't been in the creation of it. I'm often called a founder, but I was not.
There was a meeting of the NWPC, the National Women's Political Caucus, at Rice University?
Well, no, it was in Houston, but that was '73.
That was after the convention, because the caucus was formed just months before the convention, and it really was a function of enthusiasm around the country and pioneers like Shirley Chisholm and Patsy Mink, and at the time, the National Organization for Women was not playing a electoral political role. I mean, it was just very clear there needed to be an electoral body that was supporting women in elected and appointed office. And that founding meeting, chaired by Eileen Hernandez, without whom it would have flown apart. She is such a hero of the movement, and people, she's in San Francisco, still working away. That, in one of the big hotels in Washington, we had come in hundreds, largely.
See, we didn't know a thing about that in Texas.
Yeah, just, I mean, we largely, it had been people calling people they knew, said, we should have called you.
But
I don't know why.
Really,
Right, we didn't. But it was that kind of almost spontaneous meeting. There had been meetings beforehand of some organizers trying to do it, but in terms of putting out the call, I think the call really was the publicity for this founding meeting, because that's what Sissy and others saw in a much broader way.
And then an organizational meeting, and that's when I was elected in '73, February.
Yeah, so then
73
after
in Houston.
Yeah, the at the time of the Democratic Convention, there probably was a steering group of about 30 people, and there was a Democratic task force and a Republican task force, but there wasn't a proper structure because it had all happened so, like by contagion. And after the convention, we had a meeting in Houston in the Rice Hotel, no?
That's where they
Yes.
didn't page women, or what?
Yes,
was that
because
story?
we might be prostitutes, so they would refuse to page female names. In the and that meeting went on for several days, and there Sissy was elected the first chair.
Because I think up until then, as I was told, the chair was rotating on them maybe every 6 months or
Yes,
something, and
yeah.
they decided
There
they
was a
needed more
steering
structure.
committee that right.
Steering committee, that's what.
Can you talk about the significance of your nomination to be vice president and the first woman voted on for that nomination and coming in second place?
Well, it may have more. It's hard to say, because one of the aspects of it which struck me was the fact that once it was over, it was over. There was no commentary about it. Nicholas von Hoffman, I think, is the only one that said, "I out-McGoverned McGovern," was the way he put it.
How?
Well, I guess in issues, I don't know. Yeah, in issues, I think. But, and it was dead silence in Texas. It was never mentioned. It never mentioned it. And I remember speaking at an AFL-CIO state convention about 3 weeks afterwards. Never mentioned.
Really?
No.
They didn't say this is the woman who.
No. So actually, I remember being at the convention when Geraldine Farrar, and I thought, this is the way it goes, step by step, slow.
Well, we, if you'll remember, put on the cover of Miss
Miss
Magazine.
Magazine. I loved my green eyes.
We put our dream ticket.
Yeah.
Which was Shirley.
Oh, it was just
Sissy
a marvelous
together
cover.
on the cover. I mean, I'm sure you can find it to shoot. I have some copies downstairs somewhere, I think.
I need one because they get stolen from me. But no, that was the one recognition of it, was that Ms. article. There was nothing else, except when I did a lot of talking and touring for the Equal Rights Amendment as chair of the caucus. Women had stayed up to watch the thing all over the country.
To watch you be nominated, yeah. But it was, I mean, in my experience, your nomination and the people on the floor who insisted on voting for you, regardless of what their delegation had said,
As we're doing.
was joyous and full of energy. And I remember, what's the name of the famous political leader in California, Brown?
Willie Brown.
Willie Brown. People surrounded Willie Brown on the floor so that he couldn't instruct his delegation not to vote for her. He was laughing, but I mean, we
were we did not follow the rules.
No.
I was on the floor, and then I later learned I was not supposed to be. But I didn't know any better. After all, it was my first convention as a delegate.
And political conventions obviously have come to serve a different purpose. They highlight the platform, and they are, huge messages to the public, but they are no longer really places where decisions take place.
No.
I would say that was the last time, and to my knowledge, that there was,
that it was
any kind
uncontrolled.
of any
Uncontrolled.
kind of free decision on the floor.
35% of the delegates, a third of the delegates were women, up from something like 13% in 1968.
Yes, because of the reform rules.
The reforms,
and because we, in many states, we collectively had worked very hard to. In some states, the delegate selection process was so difficult that the supposedly open caucus, you had to get a court order to find out where it was. So the reform rules made a big difference.
And it came out of the violence of the 1968 convention.
That's
not to
right.
repeat
And
this.
then the McGovern
Yeah,
rules.
those rules, yes, those rules did, and then it was possible for the various caucuses, the National Women's Political Caucus, the Black Caucus, to use those reform rules.
Can you talk about your announcement speech? What you said at the Doral Hotel? What was your message? Do you remember?
I don't know. I don't remember.
It's interesting. We remember what other people said, but not what
but
we
not,
said.
No. And
That you alone could appeal to all women, all parties?
well, there was some. I saw some notes, and Karen showed them to me, and with prospective speakers, they just notes, and it may be that thing about appealing to all women, I guess. There was something about women in the beginning of these notes. I really don't remember it.
That by November 1972, the women voters of this country will outnumber the men by a margin of 8 million votes, and women will probably remain the voting majority for the rest of the century.
Well, I don't remember that. But
Turned out to be true.
Well,
right?
this was our naivete because, no woman speaks for all women, to put it mildly. And we've seen the fracturing and so forth. And I've often thought that was our naivete back there.
Talk about the excitement around your campaign. Just the excitement around the fact that your name was put into nomination.
Well, what I saw was more of it when that year I was out working for the Equal Rights Amendment. That's where I saw it. Because I had the big chill in Texas, to put it mildly. It was fun, actually. It was a spontaneous kind of thing, and those kids were excited, and I enjoyed it. It was a kind of mini, after this draining thing of 9 months in Texas and all it goes into that kind of travel and stuff. So it was fun, I will say, for that immediate time. But where I saw the enthusiasm was when I went around. I had no idea people were listening.
I think some people in Texas punished you for allowing your name to be put in.
Oh, yes, and the
nomination.
first place I heard it was coming back on a red-eyed special from Miami, and there were 2 people sitting right behind me, and the woman was saying, she'll get her come up. I said, did you see all that? It was hardly cheerleading.
Yeah,
so I got more of that than
getting
anything.
frozen out in a way.
Yeah.
But once you got to the people in the street, and
People,
certainly
it was
anybody
different.
with empathy with movements, then there was enthusiasm.
So the first thing was the chill and the criticism and all that stuff. But then people would talk to me about it, that they'd stayed up late that night, and it was wonderful. It was nice to hear.
And the National Women's Political Caucus becoming the head of it, what was the importance of that and the issues you stood for there?
I'll tell you one thing that impressed me so about the caucus, and that I felt it broadened it, was somewhere I was told that one of its principles was, against racism, sexism, and institutional violence. And to me, the key was institutional violence. And it's even more so today than it was then. And that's what really made me feel like an advocate for the caucus. I believed in ERA and so on, but that it had expanded to a crying condition in our society really is what meant a lot.
No, we had a very good statement of purpose.
Yeah.
I'm proud still of the statement of purpose, and not without cost, because there were some women who really felt that putting such issues in the platform, would detract from our appeal because of the war or because, I don't know. But I'm proud of that statement of purpose, which I'm also actually some of it was written in this living room by a ton of people, and we also used to pay each other's fares to get here, so that people who couldn't afford to come could come, and
See, this
helped
is what I missed out on.
helped draft it. I mean, right. It was class conscious as well as race, right?
Since that convention, have you ever worked together again?
Well, wait a minute, your gubernatorial campaign was after that, right?
No,
one
it
of
was
the two.
before. Oh, the second one.
The second one, yeah. Because if I was in your plane floating around Texas, it must have been.
That was the first one. We couldn't afford a plane in the second one.
Oh.
That was the first one.
Anyway, the dates of them are unclear to me, but one of them at least was after.
When you were on
Right.
the Maryland, later named the Sissy Bug or something. I don't know.
Can you talk about flying around for Sissy, pushing her nomination?
I don't remember what part of this enormous state we were we were flying around.
Someplace you wouldn't
I
be
just
welcome.
remember. I mean, it was the first time in my life I'd ever campaigned in a plane, a small plane.
Small.
And your cousin, or was if either he was flying us or he was with us. There were, I think, 3 of us on this plane, right? Anyway, I just remember going from rally to rally and both being impressed that here was a woman candidate with with this small plane, and also just aware of how hard it was. Just the work, the tiredness. I think we were doing small rallies or something, and wherever we went. But we were fueled by Sissy's energy as much as by the plane.
What makes Texas any different?
It's so big, and the different parts of the state are really different, and I didn't fully appreciate that till I went to the legislature. It's there's such a different history in different parts. I mean, for example, where I come from, well, it was Mexico, and it's just a different feeling. For example, than some people in West Texas have, where there's so much hostility. So it's a big state, I would say.
Gloria, what do you think were Sissy's accomplishments as chair of the National Women's Political Caucus?
First of all, she brought us together. This was we were, for the most part, I would say, meeting each other for the first time in Miami. Because we had organized state by state, and the signal had gone out just because of the media, and it was a very, very disparate group. So the job of making ourselves into an organization solidified around this statement of purpose, which had been written before, but which there was still disagreement about, I would say. And people's respect for Sissy, because she had already been elected. She was in a tough state. She represented all the issues. She was a walking coalition.
Not always with the votes,
but it enabled us to come together. We were an organization waiting to happen, but we were not an organization until Sissy became chair.
And I want to mention this because when I see people fight over the caucus, endorsement, from time to time that happens. I think back because at that first meeting in Houston in February of '73, was it? There was not one private home open to us. We had our first fundraiser at the Rice Faculty Club. And we had one hope for, a house large and, big enough to accommodate a group. And she said, it's fine with me, but I have to ask my husband. And that was it. And I saw the caucus change from something to stay away from politically to later being absorbed sort of into the mainstream, if you want to call it that. It may have lost some things with that, and I think it has. But that's another subject.
Well, also the three co-chairs. I mean, we also agreed that the three co-chairs would represent diversity, for instance. So, the statement of purpose, this very structure of the organization did. I mean, it's less necessary now because there's so many other. I mean, it was necessary at the time because now and the other big organizations just weren't doing electoral work, right? So it filled a very important function, but now every issue has an electoral group around it. So we're in a different time.
Gloria, what would you say are Sissy's contributions to the women's movement?
Well, there's so many. It's hard to sum up. Sissy was just enough ahead of us, meaning the National Women's Political Caucus, because she had already been elected to the state legislature, had already been active, on all kinds of issues, so that we had her to look up to. We had her to say to ourselves, see, it is possible. If this amazing woman in Texas can do it, we maybe we can do it too. And she was and is a unifying figure, unifying not only of individual women with different experience. I mean, she had 5 children. She, right? Unlike me, right? So I mean, she was unifying in all kinds of ways. Both women with individually different experiences and issues, and that was very, very important. I don't know exactly what would have happened to us and happened to the caucus otherwise. And there's a level of trust. Nothing happens without trust. I don't care how good a structure is; it doesn't happen without trust. And we trusted Sissy. We trusted her judgment.
Oh, well, I don't know. It was I learned a lot from those 2 years, and sometimes there are things that almost seem unbridgeable, like North California and Southern California. It was always difficult, even more so than Texas, to get them together, because, again, it's the distance.
They should be 2 different states.
They're
right?
2 different
Right.
states.
Sissy, what made you get involved with politics to begin with?
It was right there, like an everyday thing, and my father was involved, and there was a tradition. I guess one of the most striking traditions was objecting to the Ku Klux Klan, and that came from my father, and it came from his dealings down there because in South Texas at that time, the Klan was opposed to Catholics. And so in my family had run this thing of losing political offices because they were Catholics. So I had that in me, the sense of discrimination of a form of it. Not threatening, but there. And then this thing about the Klan. And then and my father was active. We talked politics all the time. And then I'd see things. And they never left me. About once we were bused to the new junior high school, and I saw white poverty for the first time because we lived a very segregated life. More at home than in his office because all kinds of people came to his office. And so I saw something that I wouldn't have seen otherwise. And I think some of those things made a lasting impression on me. And then I went to Vassar at 16, and I got hit with Jim Crow. So at an early age, I had to really start thinking about this issue.
What did you see? What did you see when you say you got hit with Jim Crow?
Well, I got hit because I came from a segregated state. Of course, most of the country was segregated, but it was a different kind of segregation. So I had to look at that thing for myself, because I often think, the tradition, the family was, oh yes, we had slaves, but we were benign. This is, and I think benign is the word that is so, was frequently used in the past to cover a lot, to cover the basic wrong, But anyway, so on a very personal level, I had to think about it a lot. And I always cite this thing about how we're all affected by it, because I remember I was a young married woman at the time. Thurgood Marshall came to Corpus Christi, Texas, to speak to the NWPC, and I didn't know how to go. And I always regretted I didn't hear him.
What do you mean you didn't know how to go?
Pardon? I didn't know how. I didn't know if I'd be accepted there. I didn't know if I'd be intruding. You see, it's this whole mindset, this separate thing. And that, I thought, my God, what? But I didn't know. I didn't have anyone to ask. So those are the things that are part of my life.
Is there anything else you'd like to add, or Gloria, on the significance of Sissy Farenthold down there in Texas doing the work she was doing, and doing that work nationally as well through the National Women's Political Caucus and beyond?
Well, I think, speaking of image mixed with reality, there was an idea that maybe I had absorbed here. I don't know whether it was true elsewhere or not, but that there was the slightly decade older than me feminine mystique part of feminism that was more conservative and also didn't include my life experience, which was very legitimately saying, I'm standing in the suburbs with a BA degree, there must be more to life than this, but it didn't speak to me because I was already in the labor force, so to speak, and having a tough time. It just didn't get to me. And then there were women a decade younger than me who came out of this civil rights and peace movements and so on, who I felt at home with and instructed by politically. And I thought that was the way of the world. But then here was Sissy, who was in the decade ahead of me and had all the radicalism and all the issues and all the access and all the refusal to take any boundaries, and that meant a lot to me, because I felt I had somebody ahead of me on the path.
Would you recommend to young women to get into politics?
Sure. However, I just say it's a pity every person in Texas can't serve in the Texas legislature and see what goes on, And I tell young women, I say, get into a campaign, because they'll sometimes ask me, and see how you take that, be exposed to it. And I started something up when I was at Wells College for young women interns. And see, it's like that. 20 years ago, there was a place for that. Now it's accepted. It's like the caucus role moves on to something else. So we're moving, I hope.
Thank you both.